Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Industry Leaders Panels, charting the path forward for the oil and gas industry, headwinds and tailwinds. My name is Allison. I'm your moderator for the panel. I'm a senior director at FTI Consulting in our energy practice based in Denver. And I also serve as a spokesman for Energy in Depth. It's the education and advocacy platform of the Independent Petroleum Association of America, IPAA. And before you ask, no, I am not the Will Allison who was the former head of the Air Pollution Control Division. Got that a lot this week. For the past few years, I've been right in the middle of a lot of these biggest fights, Prop 112, 181, ozone, and then other various political and regulatory challenges. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today, and I think we've got a great panel who I think can give us some terrific insight on what the industry is looking like in Colorado. So I will introduce them really quickly. We have Brian Cain, the Chief Sustainability Officer with Civitas, Andrea Passman, the Chief Operating Officer with Caerus, and Hodge, the Vice President of the Rockies Business Unit for Chevron. So with that, I'll let the three of them give brief introductory remarks.
Sure. I'm Brian Cain. I've been in the oil and gas industry for, probably 16 years or so now. I'm with a company called Civitas Resources, which was created on November 1 of last year. It's a brand new company. It was created through the merging of three, but effectively four oil and gas operators here in the DJ Basin. Extraction Oil and Gas, Crestone Peak Resources, Bonanza Creek Energy, and High Point Resources. We have now, I think, just north of about 300 employees, about 325 or so, operate about 550,000 net acres, produce about 160,000 barrels per day, and we're pure Colorado. We only operate in the DJ Basin of Colorado. We're Colorado's largest pure Colorado company, and I think we're, to this day, I know we're Colorado's first net zero oil and gas producer.
Great. Andrea?
I'm Andrea Passman. I'm the CEO of Caerus. I joined just about 2 years ago, and since that time, we've been on an acquisition spree. I think everybody knows that. And we are now at about 680,000 acres with about 13,000 locations. I think we're one of the biggest inventory holders out there, 38 TCF. We're Colorado, but we also have Uinta Basin over in Vernal, Utah. So that's also part of the operations. And when I think about Caerus, I think one of the greatest things about our company is that we live, work, and play where we operate. And I think that's something that, regardless of who you are in the room, we can all relate to. And that's definitely one of the core values at Caerus, is taking care of our backyard. And I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks to Kirby for having me, Will for being the moderator today, and to talk about these topics. It's really important.
Thanks, Andrew. Hodge?
Good morning, I'm Hodge Walker. I'm the Vice President for the Rockies Business Unit with Chevron. Been associated with predecessor companies within Chevron. Chevron's got a long history within Colorado. A predecessor company of Chevron drilled the first Weber sand well in Rangeley Field in 1931. Although we don't have Rangeley in our portfolio anymore, we still have some assets here on the western slope, our Piceance assets at Skinner Ridge. And then with the acquisition of Noble Energy about a year and a half ago, really brought in a very large additional asset in the DJ Basin. So long history here, proud to be a part of the Colorado oil and gas community. A couple comments on recent events that I think affect all of us in how we're thinking about things. As we look at the Ukraine crisis and the impacts on oil supply, natural gas, and price, it really amplifies the need for American leadership on the world stage. You know, the supply disruptions are affecting our citizens, it's affecting our communities, it's affecting our economy. So our companies are getting asked constantly, what are we doing to help address this challenge? I'd say from Chevron's perspective, we're focused on delivering domestic oil and natural gas and sticking to our strategy of delivering ever cleaner energy for a growing world. At a local level, we're bullish on Colorado. I think we can all admit that it's a complex place to produce oil and gas, and that we need predictability, and we need reliability and stability, but we've made a lot of progress here recently. So proud to be a part of this industry here, proud to be a part of moving it forward.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks,
Will.
Hodge. Thanks, Hodge. We'll go ahead and get started with some questions. Since we're all in Garfield County, Andrea, we'll kick it off with you.
All right.
Now that we're in a post-SB 181 world, what is the view from the western slope? Are your rig counts ramping up or down? What challenges are you facing, opportunities, et cetera?
So I used to have a saying that nothing on earth is harder than thermochemistry. 181 is harder to understand. So I think we can all relate to that. You know, and I've read it, I've been briefed by tens of thousands of dollars of lawyers' time to understand 181. Here's what I fundamentally know. I know that there's some key paradigms in there: local, health, and safety. And I think those are things that we can all agree on. You know, even as operators, like we talked about, we're living, we're working, we're playing all in the same place, right? And we're all neighbors, and that is definitely something we have in common. I think one of the challenges, back to what Hodge was saying, like predictability and timeframes are key. You know, just the efficiency of business is a paradigm that we have to keep the ball rolling. And I think when you talk about rig counts ramping up or down, and really what Hodge was saying, I mean, we're also bullish on Western gas, and here's why. It used to be that there was like 20 rigs running out here at the prime, but fundamentally, those wells did not produce as much as the wells do today. So, well, we only have 4 or 5 rigs running. We only have really 4 major takeaway pipelines in this region. And when it comes to energy consumption, and specifically gas of the Western United States, we're talking about 12 to 14 BCF a day that's being consumed in the Western US. And the pipes are 100% full. So even if we want to ramp, there is not the takeaway for that gas. And when we start to talk about, you know, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and LNG out of the Gulf down there, and you know, all the associated gas out of the Permian, that's okay because that's going offshore. Our gas is going to the Western U.S. And like you look at our gas here, like we're supplying that through that 12 to 14 BCF that's out there, and it's not going down. It's going up. And I think we need all the energy options that are out there. So from Caerus's perspective, you know, when it comes to ramping up, we're doing other things in terms of ramping. So case in point, I love this story. Storm Uri last year, when Texas froze, sorry Texans in the room, and like there was ice everywhere. You know, we have things here called battery blankets. We have, you know, lots of heaters out there in the field. It was like Christmas, and about 2 days before that storm hit, our marketers got on the phone with us. We got on the horn with all of our operators on the ground out here, and we said, haul ass. I mean, and everyone was just like, let's go, let's produce, let's make up this gap. And it was just one of the best couple of days ever. And in those 10 days, we were able to turn that switch, a small switch, to really make up a huge difference. Yeah, we saw gas prices explode up to $172 an MCF. That was insane. Haven't seen that. I'm happy we're at 7 today, ecstatic about that. But those micro movements are what are really gonna make a difference, because there's only so much capacity. The pipes are full, and when you look at where our market exists and where our gas go, that's where we're feeding. And then, you know, the other part of that is just back to our investors and our shareholders. We owe them a return, you know, and we wanna be disciplined about that. And that is something that has fundamentally changed in our industry and will continue to be that way. So that discipline is there, and that is gonna help out that energy mix. So, you know, but really it comes down to making sure that we can deliver on our plans, which is speed of permitting and timing associated with that, as well as making sure that we're all connected in that. And I get the workforce challenges. We're all living and breathing that every day. I mean, I saw that there's like 150 jobs out there from the regulatory side right now. Where are those people gonna come from to help us make sure that we can all get our jobs done and effectively work together?
Well, we'll just piggyback off of that. Brian, like you said, your company formed through the merger of 3 or 4 companies last year, probably the biggest operator that's come out of the SB 181 world. What are the challenges that you're seeing, and I guess more specifically, your company has, you know, built itself on an ESG-focused operation. How is that informing how you operate today?
Sure. So there are a couple things. I think, you know, there are 2 kind of main pillars by which, or through which, Civitas was formed. And one was, we're going to abide by what's known as the new E&P business model, or some call Shale 3.0. It's different from the way that we used to operate 2-3 years ago, where operators would borrow a lot of money, take on debt, leverage their balance sheet, grow through the drill bit, as we used to say. Drill as much as we could, thinking that this would always sort of be a growing industry with growing demand. In 2019, our industry basically came to a hard stop, and investors said, "You guys, you've become over-levered. You've destroyed a lot of value," and that's the truth. That's the truth of the industry. And so, over that time, and over the last really 2 or 3 years, all of us have shifted to a model that, frankly, is a lot more like personal finance. Spend less than what you make. We reinvest about 50 to 75% of EBITDA. We grow now through mergers and acquisitions. We're interested in chasing and creating value rather than growth for the sake of growth. And that's a much healthier industry. That's a much better industry. And we're creating free cash flow and returns that investors and shareholders just frankly can't ignore. And we've gotten really good response. Now, look, I mean, you've mentioned these crises, the freeze in 2021, obviously the Ukraine, I'd almost call it a tragedy, the Ukraine events, geopolitical instability. These obviously weren't part of the plan, and we don't look for these opportunities. Obviously, when there is a deep freeze, when there are grid problems with intermittency in other states, or in this state, God forbid, we'll step into the gap, we'll help to supply. But those are not things that we're hoping for or chasing. Those are things that we all just have to hopefully do the best we can to react to. But that's kind of fully 50% of the idea around which we were formed. The other 50% is we're going to be leaders in ESG, meaning the environment, social, and governance aspects of our business within a sustainability framework. And we do that a lot differently than a lot of peers, a lot of companies that are around our size. We're about a $5 billion publicly traded company. We're traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And we're doing things like pledging to be net zero now. And the way that we do that is we drive down operational emissions. We have a relentless focus on driving down operational emissions and then offsetting residual emissions using only certified offsets procured through the 4 largest and most credible registries. Now that's a really kind of different thing. It's a really interesting thing. It was an interesting thing when it was kind of first proposed to us. The thing that I like about it is that going with an immediate net zero commitment and offsetting residual emissions fundamentally changes the economics of your decision making. You're basically creating an internal tax on emissions that you're putting on yourself. And that's a very interesting thing within our industry. And I like that we are creating that framework ourselves rather than having the framework put on us. But it's interesting because now, say for example, a Texas operator, if it were to make a net zero now pledge, and it decided that it was going to, flare all this gas and, go truck this oil, if at the end of every year it demonstrably had to pay the piper for that incremental ton of emissions that it has created, the economics of that decision are not the same. Now, in $130 oil, they may do it anyway. But here in Colorado, an example closer to home, we've looked at retrofitting pneumatic devices. We've realized that if we spend $18 million over 3 years, we can knock out about 1/3 of our corporate emissions in 3 years with a spend that's about 1% of EBITDA. That's a big deal, but it's a bigger deal because we will save about $30 million in offset costs if we do it in 3 years as opposed to in 10. So we are demonstrably incentivized because of these net zero pledges to move faster on emissions reductions. And it's changed the economics of that decision making. That's one example. That's some of the environmental stuff we're doing. On the social side, we're looking to return tangible value to our communities. For so long, our companies have, we've had like the big cardboard check presentation where we kind of smile and no newspaper ever prints anything like that, but we put it on our websites. We will always have charity partners in our communities, but we've thought about different ways to return real value, tangible value to communities and to people who are actually impacted by development. One of those is the Civitas Community Fund that we're going to be standing up this year. And the idea is that we're going to take about 1% of the revenue on a per pad basis, create a bucket, and make that available for people within a mile of the pad to apply for scholarships and community project grants. And that's different, because now the people who were perhaps impacted by some of the nuisance aspects of development can have a tangible a tangible benefit. Maybe you had to put up with some more dust or noise or light or traffic, and as a result, we want to give back, not necessarily through any organization, but directly. Because we've seen for years, we've kind of missed a step in money being returned through DOLA grants or through various organizations. Another way is through community solar, and we can talk more about that, but I want to give the other folks on the panel a chance to talk.
No, I think that's a good pivot point. Hodge, Chevron, like Civitas, operates primarily on the Front Range, and as like Brian was saying, really close to community, so there's that impact. What differences has your company made? How have you raised the bar on environmental, on community impact since 181 has passed? How is that different from what you were doing, I guess, as Noble in the 2010s beforehand and then now today?
Yeah, I think, impacts on community, the health, the environment, people have always been front of mind, not just since 181. And if you go back to 2014, we were looking at how do we look at a more comprehensive approach to development over a broader area, and what is the infrastructure and facility design components that would be behind that. But for us to really kick that off, we needed to consolidate our acreage position, and during that time frame, through trades and some small deals, we consolidated that position. And with that consolidated position, it really allowed us to do the first comprehensive drilling plan within Colorado, and that was our Mustang development plan, which is in the southern part of our acreage position. It entails about 100 square miles, very large ranch owner, and the surrounding acreage around that. That comprehensive plan really allowed us to build a systematic approach to development. It allowed us to build infrastructure to move product without trucks. It allowed us to go through electrification and bring in some tankless designs. We evolved our facilities over time as we were working through it. And that was really over the course of a 6-year development plan. So that having that longer time frame, being able to engage with service providers, with communities, with landowners, and lay that plan out is very powerful in being able to be efficient, reliable, safer, and having a lower impact on the environment in our communities. The mission change really took a lot of the benefits from those comprehensive drilling plans out there and incorporated them and improved upon them in the comprehensive area plans, and also for smaller scale projects within the oil and gas development plans. That benefit really allows for longer term capital planning, but also the benefits of cumulative impact analysis over the entirety of the project.
Right. You talk about long-term planning, regulatory certainty. I think this industry, maybe more than anything else in the world, requires that, right? I mean, it's a multi-year process. We're seeing that now with oil prices. There's an urge in production, but it's not something that we can just flip the switch and overnight. A lot goes into it. So just real briefly, I'll let each of you touch base on it. How important is certainty? How important is having a stable regulatory environment to make those long-term plans? Go ahead, Brian.
It's everything. Certainty is is one of the most important elements of our business from a capital market investment perspective. For the last 3-4 years, since really the ballot initiative in 2018 and then the passage of Senate Bill 181, we have been, as an industry in Colorado, and speaking particularly for pure Colorado operators or operators with significant Colorado positions, we have been mired in uncertainty, both from ballot initiative risk and through the kind of purgatory as we waited for the rules to be promulgated. And that has been a very difficult time for us as Colorado operators. I think it's no secret on every investor call, they'll say, we're still concerned about regulatory risk there. You guys have an overhang because of regulatory risk or perceived regulatory risk in Colorado. Our message is it's gotten a lot better. And that's true. It has gotten a lot better. And it continues to get a lot better. And especially now that we have certainty in terms of rules, we have a framework. Yes, it's robust. We're not afraid of robust. We're willing to put in the work. It is tougher, I think, to find the locations. It's tougher deals made with landowners. It's made every part of the business more challenging. But at last we have certainty, and that's, to me, that is just a huge benefit for our industry and for pure Colorado operators. And we're starting to see significant investment come back into Colorado, which is extremely exciting.
Go ahead, Andrew.
It's interesting that we talk about like the uncertainty of it, but we've been living in this uncertain world for a long time. There's a phrase out there called VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this industry has got, Sean's laughing because he knows that one well. Yeah, we went to the same MBA. So, this industry is really good around planning around it. And I love to quote one of my favorite movies. I think it's the movie that exemplifies what we do, Moneyball. And there's a phrase in there where he says, adapt or die. And for every company sitting up here, there is a graveyard full of headstones out there in our industry, especially here in the Rockies, especially here in Colorado. I mean, the number of bankruptcies in the last couple years is astronomical because we didn't adapt or die. And whether that was financial decisions to get highly levered and really end up in a difficult position that way, or whether it was their ability to differentiate and really meet the regulatory requirement out there. I mean, we look at regulations as a way to differentiate. If you can operate in this world, this is a competitive advantage in this day and age. And Colorado is ahead, and there are other states following very, very close behind. I mean, I know early in my career, I worked in California in Bakersfield. That used to be like, because you've probably been there too, that used to be like the most challenging environment to work in. But Colorado is really going out. It comes out to like, this is a way the industry is going as a whole. So two companies like Civitas that are getting ahead of it, like we have to be ahead of it as an industry. And really, we don't want to be like the Luddites. We don't want to be holding on to our horse and buggies when the industry is ever evolving, whether it's regulation or whether it's America's need for energy diversity out there. Like we have to stay up with that. And that is a key paradigm. And this industry is so many smart people. There's a ton of them in this room. This is where we're going to have innovation. We're going to get ahead of it. And the regulations will be there as a part of that. So it's that planning cycle, but it is imperative to really what we were talking about, that knowing what those timeframes are, being able to have business continuity, being able to ensure that we're on plan is key. But once again, really good at being able to plan.
Yeah.
Very far ahead.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, the planning really necessitates having the reliability and the predictability from a permitting standpoint and for moving through regulations. And that doesn't mean lax regulations, that just means stability around the regulations. And with that, to the point that Andrea made, we will work through it, we will adapt through it. We've got some of the most stringent rules here in the state. But if we can sit down and diligently and willingly have a conversation and discuss those, we'll be able to apply those rules and be able to successfully apply them across the entire state.
Switching gears a little bit, Andrew, we talked about this beforehand. The industry is no different from any other sector. There's supply chain issues, there's labor shortage issues. You know, you primarily operate on the western slope here and in Utah, rural areas. If you're looking to hire people, you're looking to address these supply issues. So you've got a kid coming out of college, whiz kid engineer. How do you convince him to live in Grand Junction working for oil and gas as opposed to living in Denver and work for Google?
Yeah, have you looked out
Yeah.
here? Have you seen how beautiful this is?
It's pretty compelling.
I mean, I'm originally from Alaska, and I came to Colorado because it reminded me of home. And School of Mines gave me a really nice scholarship, so thank you, School of Mines. And I love it here, and I think we're looking for those same people, right, that want to, once again, live, work, and play right in this beautiful backyard. You know, but at the same time, this industry, boy, it has been a wild ride. In my 25 years, I don't know, 4, 6 downturns. When I graduated, oil was $20. I ended up in a job in Venezuela because of it. So, I mean, just, you know, a whole nother world. And it's been a little tough on our workers, and that reputation is out there, you know, and I think of basketball when I think about this. So the Timberwolves have a chief experience officer, and it's all about attracting players to a town that's pretty freaking cold and maybe doesn't have all the culture in the whole entire world, but it's beautiful. And I think about that chief experience officer, and we need the same thing in our industry. We need to create raving fans. And those raving fans start in our own companies. It starts in all the jobs that you're doing. And if you're not talking to the people out there that are doing the hard work, whether it's, you know, engineers aren't the hard work, let's be honest about that. It's the people out there on the ground who are turning wrenches, and you're not asking them fundamental questions about how to make their lives and jobs better. We're missing the point here, you know, and those questions are really about what should we change? You know, what shouldn't we change? You know, are we safe? Are we compliant? And then the most important question on the entire face of the planet, what else? What else? What else? And when we get the answers to those questions for the people on the ground, they're gonna make their lives better. It's gonna make their jobs better. And they're gonna be raving fans, and then they're gonna go tell all their friends how great it is. I know I was at a conference in Alabama last week for the oilfield services groups out there, and there was a University of Texas student there. He was an intern for this group, the energy workforce. And he got up and he said, I'm a petroleum engineering student, and people on my campus don't like me. And I was like, Texas. And I was like, that doesn't happen at School of Mines, so maybe you want to transfer. But like, we have to create raving fans in our industry again. And we used to have those fans, and we've lost it a little bit. And yeah, we have some raving haters out there too. We'll get them eventually as well. But it really comes down to connecting with what people want, what they need, and the workforce has changed, you know, so we gotta tap into their purpose and make sure that it aligns with ours, because it's out there. Like, we are creating a really tangible energy source for people that changes lives. You know, and that's something that not every industry can say. You know, Google, yeah, they're doing some interesting stuff out there, but are they turning the lights on for everybody? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. And whether we produce it here or we produce it somewhere else, we're gonna need it. And so Hodge, you know, your company, you operate all over the world, or all over the country, all over the world. Can you talk a little bit about kind of compare and contrast the environmental, the labor, the human rights standards in the United States, as opposed to the environmental, the human rights, the labor standards in Venezuela or Iran, right? Like, if we're gonna produce oil because we need it, is it better to produce it here, where we have high standards, or somewhere else where maybe the standards are not quite as adequate?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we look at what we're doing here in Colorado, heck, we got a lot we can teach the country, and I think we've got a lot that we can teach the world. By working with regulators to improve our operations, we're creating some of the cleanest hydrocarbon molecules there are in the state. If you look at the state from a resource standpoint, USGS about 5 years ago re-looked at the Piceance Basin, and that re-look, you know, resulted in about 66 TCF of technically recoverable resources, and a tremendous gas resource here. If you look at what was produced in the DJ Basin on the oil side, last year the DJ Basin produced 3 million barrels more than all of Oklahoma. Tremendous resource. We've got a track record of doing it. We know how to do it safely, we know how to do it reliably, and we know how to do it with a smaller environmental footprint. We led the nation in methane emissions detection, monitoring, and reduction. We led the nation in aquifer protection from a wellbore design perspective, from baselining, and from wellbore integrity. And we're leading the nation in finding ways to reduce and eliminate CO2 emissions. Tremendous quality of assets here, and we know how to do it. We know how to do it better than everybody. We should be proud of that, and we should be exporting it. If you look at bringing the noble energy assets from the DJ Basin into the Chevron portfolio, there's many of the things that we're doing and that we had been doing in the DJ Basin that we're exporting to other parts of the Chevron enterprise where they're applicable. So it's something we should be proud of and we should be helping others with.
Yeah. There's a Washington Post story from 4 or 5 years ago. It's one of my favorite headlines. It says, wind and solar have a new best friend, natural gas. Because when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, they're intermittent sources. And the thing about gas is you flip the switch and you got base load power. So I'll kick this to you, Brian. The transition is going to be long and difficult and all of that. But I think a lot of people, think gas and renewables are enemies, when in fact, Washington Post is right, they're best friends. And so I know that you're not a renewables company, but can you kind of describe a little bit about the role that gas will play in supporting the build out of renewables today, tomorrow, 30 years from now?
Yeah, so we don't have anything against renewables. We actually, we have 6 community solar projects in the RFP for Excel right now. We like gaining the competency around renewables that make sense, that work, that are actually economic. We're looking at another potential 100 megawatt development up in Weld County if that makes sense and the connection works. So we're not opposed to that. We're very much kind of an all of the above energy approach. Now, community solar in terms of the economics by no means competes with the returns on oil and natural gas wells. It's just not even close. But when you have real estate surfaces in your portfolio and you want to do something that makes a return, that cash flows in 2 years, that helps your communities, it can actually make a lot of sense for operators. From the perspective of intermittency and the role natural gas plays, to be clear, there is no energy transition without oil and natural gas. This is a really important point that everyone needs to understand. We all got kind of lulled into this kind of false narrative in 2019, 2018 that renewables are ready, they're ready to take over. It's time, they're going to step up and take over, and we were kind of going, that's not right, that's not a thing yet, and now I think we're seeing as we're faced with crisis in Europe and these companies that have made massive switches to renewable energy still need significant natural gas resources for baseload power. Baseload power is what runs, as you said, Will. It's what keeps the lights on. It's what keeps the showers hot when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. And the more renewables you add to your grid portfolio, the larger percentage of intermittency you have, essentially, right? So
right.
If your grid is 60-80% renewables, when that goes down, that's a lot of baseload that you need all of a sudden. And so natural gas, I think, is going to play a pivotal role. It plays a pivotal role now. It should continue to play a pivotal role. I think probably high time for another Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act, honestly, to get more natural gas into the utility mix and displace some of the coal that Colorado is still using. And especially as operators like us go and start certifying our natural gas resources. and there's this thing called responsibly sourced gas. And people say, well, what is that? What is responsibly sourced gas? It's still natural gas. Well, it's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of like organic apples. When organic apples first came out, I said, well, an apple's an apple. Guess who now buys organic apples? And the reason is because you can differentiate a commodity by demonstrably producing it to a higher standard. And that's what responsibly sourced gas is about. And Colorado, as Hodge said, demonstrably produces at a much higher standard than the US, which leads the world in clean hydrocarbon production. And so we're starting to get calls from utilities on the West Coast, as you said, in California, in environmentally progressive states that are saying, we want a natural gas baseload that is a little bit more politically palatable to help us bridge the gap for when the intermittency of our renewables kicks in. And so I think responsibly sourced gas is going to play a big role in that, and we're hearing that from utilities in Washington, California, Colorado, and elsewhere.
Right. Andrea and Hodge, you both alluded to it in your opening remarks. It's one thing to get the resource out of the ground, it's another thing to get it to the market, right? Opposition, obstruction to pipeline and infrastructure development is a huge deal. Now we see it in New York and New England, Pennsylvania, they sit on the Marcellus Shale, but then New York blocks the pipeline to get the gas to New York City, right? It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, a lot of times they use, when they can't, because they don't have enough pipeline capacity, they use heating fuel oil, which is about the worst thing that God put on this earth when it comes to emissions and air pollution.
And cost.
And cost, right, yeah. Without adequate development of pipelines, what challenges does this industry continue to face, right? If we can get it out of the ground, but if we can't get it to market, how much is that going to be an issue for us, not only today, but 10, 20 years into the future?
Go ahead, Hodge. I know Chevron's got a view on this.
No, I think if we're talking about investments from a midstream perspective, from a pipeline perspective, those are large investments, and those are large investments over a long period of time. So those individuals that are in that space, they need some certainty around having an upstream product to deliver. And from the upstream standpoint, we need to make sure that we've got the predictability and the stability of being able to do long-term programs to be able to deliver the products to fill those pipelines. So it fundamentally gets down to having and understanding a stable, reliable, predictable permitting and regulatory framework for those investments to be able to move forward. It all comes down to confidence, and that confidence comes from that stability and reliability.
Right. Andrea?
And, well, I mean, capital has fundamentally changed. So I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I know there's been a huge complaint that we're not getting capital into this industry more. We don't really need the capital. Those that are healthy companies, and there's 3 of them sitting right here, are free cash flowing, are self-funding, balance sheets are attractive and healthy finally, and those that aren't still there yet out there are working diligently to get that done. And so when you look at what the investors want, and yeah, there is a demand, and certainly energy demand is going up. There's also a demand to be disciplined, finally, for the first time in our industry, and that is not going away. And the predictions are out there from all the analysts who make a lot of money and write a lot of reports that we are looking at this for the next 3 to 5 years easily, right? So, and you're not seeing the turn on the dime with $7 gas, with $130 oil to just start throwing rigs at it. I mean, you look at, we're about still half the rigs that we were just a few years ago at the last peak in this whole entire nation. So like, that is something that has fundamentally changed. The other challenge with that is that during that downturn, we did not invest in new rigs. We did not invest in new frac crews, because if you think the operators can't get capital, the oilfield services guys definitely did not get capital, and they're still not getting capital. So we have a paradigm shift that, yeah, there might be a demand, there might be a need out there, but the industry has leveled out because we have disciplined operators who are gonna eat their own dog food and live off their free cash flow and be self-funding, and we don't really need the external capital to do that. And then secondarily, we have the oilfield services out there that are leveling out because we haven't made the investments in new equipment to go and be able to ramp up. And then on top of that, throw in the workforce challenge on top of that, and you've got a flattening out of the industry, and it's gonna be here for quite a while.
Yeah. And right back to you really quickly, a lot of this, I think people think that not in the industry that, producing is just drilling a hole in the ground and hoping something comes out, right? I'm
It's
sure
a
if we did
giant pool under there.
Yes, yeah. I'm sure if we did a poll, we'd probably get a lot of respondents who said that's the way it works. But it's obviously a lot more than that. I think all of you can probably answer this. What are some of the modernization, digitization efforts that you've undertaken in recent years that has helped you locate resources, get it out of the ground, and do it with a much smaller impact on the environment and communities? I think someone said that, these days you're a technology company that does energy as opposed to just an energy company. So I'd love for you all, in our last kind of few minutes here, to kind of describe some of the progress you've made in recent years.
It goes back to my earlier comment about adapt or die. Like, if you're not doing AI and machine learning, and the engineers are coming straight out of school with these skills. They know R, they know Python. Like, this is easy for them. If you're not doing predictive maintenance on your compressors to figure out when they're going to go down, if you're not using drone technology and flyovers to figure out where your emissions are and then pulling that data in, you're behind already. And I don't think there's a company out there today, I know the three on this stage, that haven't evolved already and aren't trying to really get ahead of that curve to utilize data and digitization, and then combine that with a rock solid ESG program to get ahead. Yeah, we were just talking about the solar plants, like we're building one right now. And we're not doing it just so we can have a solar plant on our ESG report.
Right.
We're doing it because financially that made sense to generate our own power from our solar on our surface rather than paying Excel for it. And it was in partnership with Excel, it was through an RFP. So like, if you're not doing those things today, if you're not getting on top of having, and I really like to think of it as molecule preservation. Why burn a molecule of a fossil fuel in order to produce a molecule of fossil fuel? That's where we're getting to that net zero kind of mentality. If you don't understand that and you're not utilizing all of your data to get there and do that, you're already behind. Like, you better go try to poach every Python person out there that you can possibly find. And part of that, though, is attracting them to our industry as well, the data scientists, the data engineers, the people that have these amazing skill sets, to let them know that they're doing something good, and providing energy, to people out there rather than something bad. And so, once again, just it always gets back to the people and making sure that we're inspiring them to be a part of our industry. But at the same time, like, once again, if you haven't done it already, like, you missed the boat.
Yeah. Well, I think we got, looks like 3 more minutes, so I'll let Brian and Hodge wrap us up here on that.
Sure. I'll go quick, I promise. I look, for us, data analytics around emissions, still huge. Data analytics and understanding your cost of carbon, your internal cost of carbon, and what that means basically is laying out your projects and understanding where can you reduce the most emissions per dollar spent. Where's the low-hanging fruit? Understanding that and attacking that low-hanging fruit for real emissions reductions. The other thing, maybe unpopular opinion lately, but we still love electrification, and you can't do it everywhere. But it's a great, I think, crossroads between the E and the S in ESG, because when you're electrifying compression on artificial lift, or a better example, you're electrifying a drilling rig, you're getting rid of all of those generators in the backyard that are chugging away, that are creating source emissions, not at a power plant, but in the community, right? And so you want to get rid of those, but you're also getting rid of the trucks that are delivering fuel to all those generators. And so you're getting rid of those emissions. You're also getting those trucks off the road, and so you're not creating more traffic in that community. And you're also operating the rig in a way now that's nearly silent. And you've also got a rig now that's demonstrably more reliable, because anything that's hooked up to the grid tends to be more reliable than anything that's hooked up to a bunch of generators. So we still love electrification. It's got environmental benefits, moving scope 1 to scope 2. Again, talking about the offsets and thinking about things from that perspective. I'd rather buy RECs than offsets, so I want to move that. Maybe that's a different panel. But anyway, we still love electrification. Hodge, sorry.
And I'd say just from a data analytics standpoint, we've got an integrated operating center where we can look at our operations all over the place. That really helps us from collecting the data. It helps us from a reliability standpoint, and really with that data and doing the analytics on it, it really aids us in innovation. Our newest generation facilities are tankless, they're electrified, and to the point that Brian was making is, So these facilities are now delivering, nearly no VOCs. We've dropped our greenhouse gas emissions by 95%. They're more reliable. The fact that we've got less equipment out there, a smaller footprint, that means they require less maintenance and they're safer. So it's being able to look at the entire equation here, and the data analytics is the foundation to that innovation.
That's great. Well, we'll wrap it up on that point. I hope this has been informative for everybody, and I think it goes to show that the innovation and the technology that's behind your companies is making our world a better place, and we're doing it safer and cleaner and better than we ever have. And so I think that the industry continues to move forward. So
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
I got us behind. We're going to take just a couple of questions real quick. I apologize. I got us behind today.
Oh, yeah.
Dennis?
I want to make, okay. Quick loaded question for you. I'm going to load the powder keg for you. So, my name's Tyson Johnston. I'm the Vice President of Land and Regulatory for Gunnison Energy. I am also the co-chair on the Environmental Justice Action Task Force. Working with DI communities has been a huge part of my personal, place to put my expertise in my spare time. And one of the issues with the DI communities, I grew up on the West Slope, rural Colorado. I'm familiar with rural DI communities. I spent the last 5-6 years working with urban DI communities. And as we go through some of the things you were explaining about clean energy standards and what does that effect have on the cost of energy, the income disparities, the DI community growth, the things that we've been talking about over and over again in conjunction with that, and how can we move forward, because clean energy costs. It has a huge cost to it. So how do we not pass that cost down to these DI communities? How do we not grow our DI communities? How do we not have these adverse effects on these DI communities? Just a thought from industry professionals like yourselves. How does that thought go into all of these actions that you're taking?
So, couple thoughts on that. Number one, I mean, obviously, as industry, we need to be reinvesting in our communities, and not just through ad valorem taxes and DOLA grants, but real meaningful investments, and particularly when communities are hit hard by challenges and difficult events. And so, as Civitas, that's something that we've stepped up and done. In our communities, we will continue to do. The other, and I'll just make that point broadly. The other point, though, is that renewables don't have to always raise costs. There are opportunities in the case, I mentioned community solar in particular, because of the way that the regulations are written in Colorado. Again, we like community solar, we like the economics around it, but we also like that you can do a development in a goat pasture in Weld County because of the way the regs are written, and you can attribute that renewable energy and the cost savings that comes with that, with community solar in particular, to the most disproportionately impacted or socioeconomically impacted areas of Aurora, or basically anywhere else in Xcel's territory if you're creating that energy in Xcel's territory. And so what we see with these community solar developments, and again, we're doing these because we already had the surfaces, they were already on the grid and they made sense, is you get a 10 to 15% reduction in utility costs for neighboring subscribers. And so there are at times benefits, and I think as operators, again, we have to take an all of the above energy approach and look for those benefits for communities and for helping the administration and the state get closer to its renewable goals.
And I would say you're absolutely right about the costs that are associated with heavy regulation, right? And then part of that is that reinvestment cycle to be able to meet those regulations. So I think you're 100% correct about that. I think the challenge that we have as an industry is when we look at our diverse communities and where we can make an impact, it's all about job creation. And regulations and meeting those do create job creation. And when you look at our industry, yeah, it's not a bunch of engineers out there, and it's not a bunch of finance people. it's a lot of the trades. And the trades are really where we have an opportunity as an industry to work with our local communities to make sure that we are getting people into those programs. And there's a ton of great ones out there that we're all contributing to. So I think we have to double down on that. And that's really the future of our industry as well. And people that get it, like if you live here, you know that. You see it in your friends, you see it in your neighbors, and you see opportunities that are missed or not missed, you know, because we're importing people from outside, or we're exporting our people to Texas because that's where the jobs are at. So why not keep them here? Why not invest in our educational programs? Why not invest in STEM programs in our schools to get those thoughts in there early so they know there's opportunity in the future? And that's really where we take that sort of cycle that comes from higher regulation, increased costs, profits associated with gas prices or oil prices going up, and then reinvestment in our communities. It's always, always, always about education at the fundamental level that truly makes a difference and where we see change occur.
All right, and I think with that, we're good. So thank you again to our panel.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you all very much.